I have been in broadcast industry about 15 years or so since 2005. 2005 when I graduated from SAIT, and have been sort of moving between broadcast and audio visual. Worked on projects like the biggest project that I worked on was Edmonton Arena, and I have been over the last several years I have been teaching in at SAIT. I am still teaching at SAIT, but due to broadcast program being shut down, I think 3 years ago now or so, I transitioned to cybersecurity. I have always been working with sort of an IT side of things and video side of things, but I now fully transitioned to cybersecurity. I have several people here that I have taught, so I say hi to Amrita and Andrew, and I think Benford was there. When it comes to cybersecurity, this presentation will be really just a 10,000 feet, overview of what is happening in cybersecurity and things that are related to broadcast. I really want to ensure that I sort of bridge those two things, the cybersecurity and broadcast, because it is becoming very relevant to your industry. And I think I am sort of uniquely positioned to have at least some understanding. At least I think that I have some understanding of both. So for today, what we'll talk about is we'll look at the whole landscape within Canada, and I'll give you some numbers here in a little bit. These numbers are sort of shocking to many people because people that don't work with cybersecurity don't realize how much damage there is happening within Canada and North America on a basically daily basis. Then we'll look at broadcast industry and where you actually fit in within, how the cybersecurity relates to broadcast industry. I will go through some common cybersecurity threats. Most of these you may already be familiar with. I'll just review some of the terms so that you are familiar with some of these things that you may read on the internet here and there. I also think that it's very important to talk about new and upcoming threats and how they relate to what is changing and how we have to look at cybersecurity now and in 5 years, 10 years, etc. And finally, I'll give you resources how you as broadcast engineers can actually help, because there are several things that you can do right now, most of these free or very inexpensive, that will improve your facilities cybersecurity, that will and improve the sort of the social aspect of understanding. So cybersecurity landscape in Canada. We do have in Canada, what is known as a Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. It's a government agency that releases a national cyber threat assessment every year. It's a long PDF that talks about some of the changes that are happening within Canada. And for this year, I looked at a 2023-2024 report, and they typically have several what they call key judgments. So those are the bottom line, what is happening in Canada right now. So I only took 3 of those key judgments. I think there are typically 6 of them or so. But the top 3 is the top 3 facts, I guess, are the fact that ransomware is here. Ransomware is happening in Canadian organizations, and it is extremely, extremely damaging. Ransomware may not be the most prevalent threat for industries in Canada and North America, but it is perhaps the most damaging, and we'll talk about that in a second here. The second judgment says critical infrastructure is increasingly at risk from cyber threat activity. We will sort of talk about in a second here what is critical infrastructure and is broadcast actually part of critical infrastructure definition in Canada. The point really here for this key judgment is that, generally speaking, threat is increasing. The activity, the cyber attacks are increasing in Canada, and very interestingly, also, I'm not sure, I mean, interesting to me at least, is that Canadian corporations are more likely to be attacked than in the United States. For whatever reason, Canada is a bigger threat or bigger target, let's say, than the United States. I'm not quite sure where that is coming from. We are slightly behind in addressing some of these threats, and this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you about this and why it's important. And then the third judgment is that there are some technologies that are coming up, like cloud and AI, that are posing new threats and are going to cause lots of issues over the next 5 to 10, maybe 15 years when they mature a little more. We already see cloud coming up quite a bit in broadcast. So it is one of the things that change the landscape in Canada. So looking at some of the numbers, once again, these are numbers from the National Cybersecurity Assessment of 2023-2024. These numbers are about critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure is defined as an infrastructure that can, or that if it is attacked, will affect larger number of people, or can have large impact on social life in Canada. So they have these categories from water treatment plants and water facilities all the way to oil and gas. You can see here that in 2019, close to 10% of water facilities had incident. In other words, there was an attack that was successful. And in oil and gas, it's as high as close to 40%. So the average in Canada every year, about 18 to 20% of critical infrastructure companies are being attacked or have been successfully attacked. That's, to me, it's a huge number, and in fact, in my opinion, the threat is even higher than that, because there are certain rules when the companies have to release these numbers. If the attack is small enough, they don't have to release numbers. They don't have to tell the government that the attack happened. So that means I believe these numbers are lower than the real numbers. So let's say 20 to 22, 23% of Canadian infrastructures are being attacked, have successful attacks every year. So when it comes to how much it actually costs to like every attack, there is some numbers from 2000 that we have from 2020. So average ransomware. This is just ransomware. Average payout in Canada in second quarter of 2022 was just under 300,000 Canadian dollars. So when this is just the ransomware payout, it does not include the cleanup of the attack. So when you look at, let's say, if it was a facility and they had a ransomware, they had to pay out $300,000 for ransom, but they also had to bring in people to do backups or to restore from backups. They had to bring in team to change passwords, maybe change some hardware. Maybe the facility was shut down for sometimes a couple weeks. It is believed the average cost of an attack, of a successful attack, is closer to $3 million. So 10 times about 10 times the amount of the actual ransom. And you can see here from the numbers that these are actually increasing. So that $3 million, $3 to $3.5 million for an attack, for the cost of the attack, is maybe a couple of years ago. So it might be even higher now. So where does the actual broadcast industry fit in? This is one of the questions that I sort of asked myself over the last couple of months or so. And technically, broadcast facilities are not considered a critical infrastructure. You have to look at the fact that Canadian government mostly looks at critical infrastructure. There's definitely argument for some of the facilities within broadcast industry to be considered critical infrastructure. Let's say, when we have 5:40 a.m. in Watrous, Saskatchewan, that tower is designated during the wartime to be operational. So there are definitely facilities that would fit within that critical infrastructure designation, but by and large, broadcast facilities do not fit in it. But I personally believe that it is not a right question to ask. I think there is two separate aspects that we need to look at from the broadcast industry, and that's the infrastructure versus the business perspective. So, and I know you like, for broadcast engineers, naturally, you probably care more about the infrastructure perspective, but there is a business perspective to this as well. So from the infrastructure perspective, we would be looking at stuff like, do you have anything in the cloud? Do you have access? Do people have access from outside into your infrastructure? Are you sending anything over IP, etc.? In most facilities, the answer would be yes. So yes, cybersecurity absolutely is relevant to the broadcast industry. Now, when you look at the business perspective, I think the main question here is, if an attack happened, let's say you have a ransomware, and your full facility is shut down for sometimes a week, maybe 2 weeks, are you able to survive? Is from that business perspective. How much money are you going to lose on top of that $3 or $3.5 million for the cleanup of the attack? So I think those are an important aspects to look at, and should be really evaluated. The whole cybersecurity industry is sort of moving away from looking at vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities would be any holes and any troubles that your facility may have, right? So is your IP infrastructure vulnerable to certain attacks? We are now switching to more of a risk assessment, because not every vulnerability necessarily poses high risk. Risk is based on likelihood and how much damage it can pose or create. So there is a big shift of looking from instead of assessing vulnerabilities, is to assess risk of the facility or the infrastructure. That is sort of what I'm trying to do with my company, within consulting, to assess how much risk this infrastructure may have. A good example of high risk versus low risk might be passwords. So, for example, if you have MAM that is in a cloud, and somebody hacks into it, what are they going to steal? Maybe somebody steals your passwords and they were able to hack into some of the parts, some of your servers. Are they actually going to find information that will be damaging? That may depend on what they hack into. So there are ways of assessing this risk for every part of your facility. So when it comes to some of the common cybersecurity threats, I'm not sure how familiar you are with these terms. By the way, if you have any questions when I'm talking about these, you can absolutely jump in and just ask questions. But I have selected 8 sort of top threats that are talked about and I think are relevant for the broadcast industry. I have a list of 4 here. On the next slide, I will have 4 more. But when you look at this table, anything that is in a green, you as an engineer can do something about, right? Or you as a manager can do something about. Anything that's red, we absolutely still can do something about it, but that would be more, a specialized IT team that would have to, or specialized hardware that would have to take care of those threats. And yellow is sort of a special one here. So the first one, malware, ransomware. Malware and ransomware is basically any software that can do damage that has a malicious intent. Ransomware is especially damaging because what happens with the ransomware is when it gets installed on your servers, it sort of spreads like a virus, the same way as virus would spread out. But it encrypts everything. All your data are being encrypted with a key that you don't have access to. So that means that within minutes, you can lose access to everything, all the servers at the same time. And they are not unlocked until you pay ransom, until you pay some money, typically through Bitcoin, which are untraceable to, then the bad actors will actually give you the key to unlock this and clean up. So because of this, because you get fully locked out, and then you have a choice to either pay and get your data back, or you don't pay and you have to clean it up yourself. That means deleting everything from every single server and rebuilding these servers once again. So the choice is, unfortunately, oftentimes when you are dealing with people that create ransomware, you cannot trust them that even if you pay them, they're going to unlock it for you. Or if you pay them, it still doesn't guarantee they are not going to leak some of your data or release them to public. So there are everything from ethical issues through technical issues through social issues that are involved with ransomware. And what you can do with this, you can absolutely deal with education side of things. We'll sort of come back to this, but just educating your people that are working with these systems to not click on phishing links, for example. Password hygiene is a big part of this. Having proper antivirus, patching, etc. Those are all things that you can do when it comes to malware and ransomware. Then we have a denial of service. Denial of service is, imagine that you have a server that is accessible from the outside. So maybe you're connecting once again to some data from outside, and somebody decides to send requests to this server, and they are sending millions of requests every second. That means that server that was supposed to be accessed just gives up and says, I'm not allowing anybody to access my server. So all of a sudden you lose access to your data. So any legitimate user will not have access. The access is denied. From the engineering perspective, there is not much you can do. There are things that that firewalls some firewall settings and network monitoring can do this, but or can prevent it, but not necessarily by broadcast engineers. Then we have phishing. Phishing is prevalent. Phishing is there every day. Phishing happens all the time. It's those emails that ask you to click on a link. Typically, phishing is used to harvest credentials. So, for example, you click on it, it looks like your bank account. So you will type your username and password to it, and you don't log in. You forget about it. You just don't know that somebody has just harvested that username and password from you. Oftentimes, people being people, we've reused passwords, so that password may be common for all of the services. Now the bad people can get into your system. One of the things that once again, we'll come back to this, but one of the biggest thing that you can do to prevent phishing is education, talking to people, awareness. Identity-based attacks is very much related to phishing. Phishing is more of a broader term, but identity-based attacks are if somebody actually gets into your server using somebody else's credentials. So they harvested credentials, and they are now able to get into your system and do all sorts of different things: delete files, encrypt files, install ransomware, etc., right? So those are identity-based attacks. Then we have code injection and supply chain attacks. Neither of these you personally can do, but I just wanted to include them because they are prevalent in the industry. Code injection is something where when you have a misconfigured website, right? So somebody, let's say you're running a server with a website, and people are able to get into this website and gain data through different attacks, for example, SQL attacks. I don't want to get too much in depth in this, but the best prevention for code injection attacks is testing your website. There are professional services that can test out your services, or that can test out your website and tell you if you are vulnerable to some of these. It's not something that is typically done in-house. It's typically outsourced to somebody else. Supply chain attacks. These are oftentimes, let's say you are downloading firmware or some software off of the website, but you get that firmware or software not from the original source, but from somebody else, and that firmware or software had malware built into it. That's called supply chain attacks. Once again, this is mostly you as an engineer. If you are downloading software, just ensure that you are downloading it from the trusted source. Insider threats is one of those that almost nobody talks about or thinks about, but those are people that maybe you laid off and they are angry. Those are people that used to work for your company, no longer work for your company, but somebody did not take them out of the system, so they still have access and they might do some damage. So that's insider threats. And then IoT-based attacks. In this form, IoT is more about devices that have internet access. So for the broadcast industry, this could be ENG cameras that you take into a field, and somebody steals your ENG camera. They now may have access to some of your passwords, for example, right? So, or they steal some of your encoders. They might have access to some of your systems, some of your VPNs, etc., right? So that's IoT-based attacks. So these are sort of top 8 that are at least somewhat related to broadcast that you should be at least aware of. Maybe not necessarily fully understand how they work, but at least be aware of these
terms that should be looked at.
I'll jump in with one or two real
Yep.
quick examples. On the IoT based one of the things that we've encountered, and I've seen it at home already, is, and I'll use as an example a Wise camera.
Mhm.
Somebody
Yep.
can access your Wise camera, and you don't think that's such a big deal, except now they've got an entry to your home network, and that is a big deal.
Absolutely.
So, so they
Absolutely.
use the IoT device as a launch point.
Exactly.
Um,
But yeah, Jeff, when it comes to IoT attacks, one thing that people don't necessarily realize, by the way, right now at SAID I'm still teaching, and I teach IoT cybersecurity. So one of the things that we do is firmware extraction. Uh, so let's say you have an IoT device. It doesn't have to be a camera. It can be really any device that you take into a field that has network access. And through firmware extraction, you are oftentimes able to download keys. So cybersecurity keys or encryption keys that you would download and reuse. So now you have full access to your system because of that. And people, it doesn't even need password. Just the way we build tunnels, VPN tunnels from some of the cameras or from some of the devices to your facility. If that device is compromised, oftentimes they can get full access to everything in your facility and you don't even know it. So some of the new threats that are coming up is the biggest one that we are talking about right now are cloud, AI, and quantum computing. So when it comes to cloud, most of the broadcast facilities, I believe, these days are being uh, affected by cloud, by some of the migration to cloud. So the big threat there is that you are now creating pipeline from your facility to the cloud. You don't necessarily know what is happening in that cloud. We are making assumptions that the cloud is automatically secure. That is a very, very dangerous assumption. It may be true, it may not be true. So there are methodologies to test that. But one of those things is misconfiguration of this cloud. So there might be one little setting that an engineer who was setting up the cloud for you may have misconfigured, and that opens it up for lots of vulnerabilities. And now, because you have that large pipe between the cloud facility and your facility, you are now opening it up for potential access, or even if there's no access, you may opening it up for denial of the service, right? So you will no longer have access to your footage, for example, or your sources. The artificial intelligence, how that is changing the landscape a little bit here is phishing emails. We are now seeing, I'm not sure if you've seen phishing emails that are creating today versus phishing emails that were creating 2-3 years ago. Now, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you are able to create absolutely perfectly looking phishing email using artificial intelligence, right? You go into ChatGPT and you ask it to produce something for you, and it will create it with perfect English, with links that are obfuscated, links that are looking legitimate, logos that are looking legitimate, and you as a human cannot discern between the two. That was not the case 2, 3, 4 years ago when these tools were not as mature. We used to see lots of bad English emails. That is not really happening anymore. All the phishing emails are in perfect English, looking absolutely phenomenal. So that's where artificial intelligence. Another thing that AI will change and is already changing is the creation of some of these tools. So people that are trying to attack facilities, you can actually go and ask AI to create a full attack for you, and it will do so. It will it will program this in Python or C, and oftentimes it executes perfectly because
it uses all this data from the whole world basically to create some of these tools and tool chains that will attack your facility. So you don't necessarily even have to be a fantastic programmer anymore to be able to attack other people's computers and systems. And then final, quantum computing. Right now, we are putting lots of effort or lots of trust into encryption. And the very basic of encryption, encrypting your data, is that it is possible to decrypt through what is known as brute forcing. So you keep testing your keys over and over. It is just not feasible. It might take 100,000 years for you to crack that key, right? To open up, to unlock the door for you. Where with quantum computing, we are now able to reduce that, or researchers are now able to reduce that from 100,000 years to 6 months. So all of a sudden there are majority of encryption mechanisms are not what is known as a quantum computing proof. So there are some that are, but majority of these encryption keys or encryption mechanisms are not proof against quantum computing. So in other words, quantum computer will be able to crack them in minutes or weeks or months instead of thousands of years. So that's sort of what is happening right now. So let's sort of spin this to how you can help. What can you actually do? There is sort of 5 things that you as a broadcast engineer can do, and that's password hygiene, education, backups, and incident response plan, and compliance. So I think when you look at password hygiene, so that means how you structure your password, whether they are administrative passwords or user passwords, really matters. It's one of the most basic things that you can do is to ask your users and for yourself to create proper passwords. So the table on the right here shows how fast you can actually crack some of these passwords or guess if you automate it using computers. And we do this, by the way, at SAIT all the time. We give students sort of a gamified tasks where they try to crack some of these passwords. And obviously, I think everybody knows that if you have like a PIN number that is only numbers and has 4 digits, that can be cracked instantly, basically, right? It takes milliseconds to crack for the computer to crack that. Now, typically the passwords, the way I set them up for myself, I'm going to have at least numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and set it up so that it's 15 or 16 characters long. That way, with today's computer, the estimation is about 2 million years for you to go through every combination, right? So this is what you're trying to accomplish here. You are trying to prevent from somebody guessing your password. So the difference would be something on the left-hand side. The first 2 that are in a red are not good. They may look that they are good, but they are not good enough for today's standard. So it should truly be randomized string that is 14, 15, 16 characters long, has uppercase, lowercase letters in it, it has numbers, etc. Now you're maybe thinking, how do I keep track of these? By the way, every password should be different for every login. You may have a couple hundred logins, every password should be different. To keep track of these, you should be using Password Manager. So Password Manager is a software that you install, and it will do the randomization for you. It will keep track of these. It will auto-populate some of these websites. So if you go to log into your bank, it recognizes that it's your bank, and it will auto-populate your passwords. So you never have to know these, but you are preventing from other people guessing your password or brute forcing your password. So that's one of the most basic things, is to promote the use of Password Manager, is to promote
use of different passwords for every login is to promote the long randomized passwords within your facility. The next thing that you can do is education, and that is very much tied to what I have just talked about, is the promoting and creating awareness. So phishing awareness is something that engineers and managers can set up so that it is at least talked about. It doesn't have to be necessarily, it doesn't have to be not only expensive, it doesn't have to cost anything, but it doesn't have to be something that is extensive, right? It's just mention it 4 times a year in your meetings. Hey, there are phishing emails. These do exist. When it comes to social engineering awareness, social engineering is an act of somebody coming to your facility and pretending to be, for example, an IT manager, right? We've had very successful experiments at SAIT where students went into, they did an actual test where they created a scenario with the company knowing about them. The CEOs signed off on it, but they went into a facility and pretended to be an IT management company, and they were able to get into every door. They were able to find master key. Students were able to get into a server room. And if they were bad actors, if they were people that had malicious intent, they would essentially own the company. They would be able to shut down everything, delete everything, install ransomware, whatever they wanted. So social engineering, we are especially as humans, we are especially vulnerable to social engineering. Somebody smiles at us and typically we trust them. So password hygiene education is sort of the same as phishing awareness. Just talk about it bring it up in some of these meetings. That will help you immensely. Phishing campaigns is something that it is oftentimes done in larger context. There are companies that run phishing campaigns every 3 months, so they actually send phishing emails to all of their employees. This is a little more costly, but there are websites or services that will help you do that. And then typically you will count how many people clicked on it and how many didn't. And let's say there is a certain threshold, you will say, hey, if more than 2% of people actually click on these, we will trigger an official education for everybody, right? So there are certain ways of dealing with phishing. And then that would be part of the larger cybersecurity education program that you can run, right? So bringing somebody else in and actually having them have these conversations that would be targeted specifically for what your facility needs or what your company needs. Backups, you probably are already doing backups, most of you, I hope. They are a big part of dealing with ransomware so that you can recover without paying, and hopefully you can recover fast. So there is what is known as a 3-to-1 rule of backup. That means you are supposed to have 3 versions of your data, one of them being live and 2 backups on 2 different media. So let's say in a cloud and on hard drives, or on hard drives and on tapes. And one of those should be offsite. So whether, once again, you are using cloud or you are using an offsite facility. This may not be, as I mentioned here, it may not be feasible for archives because you might have terabytes of archive footage for some of the facilities. But at least some of the servers and databases should be backed up regularly. So when it comes to regular backups, there are 2 measures. It's called recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Where recovery point objective is how much data you can lose. Are you recovering to something that was yesterday or a week ago, or something that was an hour ago? So that's your recovery point objective. How far back do you need to go? And then recovery time objective is how long does it actually take you to recover? Does it take 5 hours to recover and rebuild everything, or does it take you a week to recover and build everything? Big part of recovery is the testing, just like you do with gensets on larger facilities, hopefully once a month, but in smaller, maybe every 6 months or so. And the same should be with the backups. You should know exactly how long it takes you to recover if something happened. And that's something that you can bring up and set up as an engineer and ensure that you're testing it. Incident response plan. Incident response plan is basically a plan of what you do. Like Jeff was saying, they were able to isolate that computer. This would be part of the plan. I have a really good friend of mine who does gamified response plan and response. So this guy would actually come in and do a role play similar to Dungeons and Dragons, and they go through scenarios, right? To know exactly what you do if you have ransomware, if you have attack. But a big part of it is knowing the duties, having the realistic expectations, and actually having the plan. Finally, compliance. So compliance, there are several frameworks that you can follow through. CIS 18, Center for Internet Security, is sort of the bottom line, the minimum. You can do that in-house. And it looks at 18 different aspects of your facility. So for example, do you have a password manager? Do you have a firewall set up properly? Do you talk to people about phishing, et cetera, et cetera? So there's 18 of these points. And you just literally check off, yes, I do have it, or no, I don't have it. And it will tell you where your deficiencies are. Super easy to do. I would encourage everybody to at least look at that. Then we have a NIST cybersecurity framework. This one will advise you how to actually secure your facility. I would advise bringing somebody in and to actually get compliant with this. So this is, once again, looking at the technical aspect. So how do you actually set up your firewall to ensure that it's compliant? Then SOC 2 Type 2 and ISO 27001, both of those are more on policies side. So do you have policies that if new people come in, you ask them to create proper passwords? Do you give them training, etc.? So this is more of a business policy framework that you can do. ISO 27001 is quite expensive, and it's sort of a global audit that you can do, where SOC 2 Type 2 is North American, and it advises you on what type of policies. And I can, these are some of the things that I focus on is the compliance and the education side of things through my consulting business. So some of the resources I will send out. Jeff, actually, maybe if you can, I can send this to you, and maybe you can send this out to everybody once we are done here. But there are some links here, specifically the National Cyber Threat Assessment report. It's if you're interested looking at that. There are some more details about the common types of cyber attacks that I talked about. And then once again, I would encourage you to sort of look at the CIS 18 list. So one thing that I would like to, I'm almost done here, but if you have any questions, once again, I believe that I am well positioned to understand the broadcast, at least to a certain degree, and understand the cybersecurity. If you have any questions, and I'm not saying this to promote the business or anything like that, I will talk to you for free. If you have questions about passwords, password managers, education, how to approach this, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.